In the untamed wilderness of Alaska, where icy winds carve through the forests and life is a constant struggle for survival, one man stumbled upon a sight that would forever change his destiny. A lone wolf, injured and weak, lay trapped in a cruel snare. By her side were 4 fragile cubs, their tiny bodies shivering with fear and hunger. Most people would have walked away, too afraid of the dangers that come with saving a predator like a wolf. But this man, guided by compassion rather than fear, made a choice that would alter both his life and the lives of the creatures before him. He cut the snare loose, tended to the wolf's wounds, and ensured the cubs had food to survive. 4 years later, in the same unforgiving wilderness, something extraordinary happened. Something that proved the bond between man and nature is far deeper than we can ever imagine. The encounter in the frozen wilderness. The story begins in the depths of Alaska's wilderness, a place where snow blankets the earth for most of the year and silence reigns except for the howl of distant wolves. It was during a routine hike through this harsh, frozen terrain that the man, a seasoned outdoorsman with a heart for nature, stumbled upon something that would alter the course of his life. At first, he thought it was a trick of the wind. The faint cries carried across the valley, but as he pressed closer, he saw her, a majestic gray wolf, her body weakened by hunger and pain, caught in the grip of a cruel steel snare. Her golden eyes locked with his, filled with both defiance and desperation. The man froze. He knew all too well the danger that came with approaching a trapped wolf. A single wrong move could trigger her survival instincts, leading her to lash out. Yet something deeper stirred within him. He noticed the small cubs huddled close by, their ribs showing through thin fur, their tiny bodies trembling in the cold. They were helpless, and without their mother, their fate was already sealed. The man's heart ached at the sight, and a decision that most would call reckless began to form in his mind. Instead of leaving, he crouched low, whispering to calm the wolf as though she might somehow understand his intent. The air between them hung heavy with tension, but the man could not ignore the truth staring back at him. This was not just a predator caught in a trap. This was a mother fighting for her life and the survival of her family. With trembling hands and a racing heart, he made his choice. He would not walk away. Breaking the chains of fear, approaching a trapped wild animal is a test of courage few would dare to take. The man knew that fear alone could undo him. He had grown up respecting the wild, aware that wolves are not villains but creatures trying to survive just like humans. Yet as he crept closer, his instincts screamed at him to turn back. The steel trap had bitten deep into the wolf's leg, its sharp edges cutting into flesh with each attempt she made to break free. Her growls rose in warning, a low rumble that reverberated in the snowy silence. But the man refused to retreat. He spoke softly, his words calm though his pulse thundered in his ears. "Easy now, I am not here to hurt you," he murmured, though he doubted she understood anything beyond the tone of his voice. Slowly, he laid down his backpack, retrieving a thick blanket and a pair of heavy pliers he carried for emergencies. He knew he had one chance to get this right. If the wolf lunged or panicked, it could end in bloodshed. Gathering his courage, he tossed the blanket gently overhead to dull her vision and immediately worked on the trap. The cubs whined frantically nearby, confused by the strange man interfering with their world. With every twist of the pliers, the steel jaws loosened until finally, mercifully, the cruel snare snapped open. The wolf collapsed into the snow, too weak to fight, her breath coming in labored gasps. For a moment, the man stepped back, unsure if she would spring at him in fury or flee into the woods. But instead, she remained still, her golden eyes now softer, almost questioning. For the first time in hours she was free. A mother's fragile trust freedom did not mean safety. The wolf's leg was badly injured, her strength sapped by the trap and by days without proper food. The man stood in the snow, conflicted. He had freed her, but leaving now would only condemn her and her cubs to slow suffering. Nature can be brutal, and while he respected its laws, he also carried a sense of responsibility for what he had done. The cubs, 4 in number, were tiny things still reliant on their mother for warmth and milk. Their cries pierced the silence, tugging at his heartstrings. The man knew he had to act, though every instinct warned him against interfering further. Wolves were not pets, they were wild, unpredictable, and fiercely protective. Yet in that moment, something remarkable happened. As he stepped closer with a small portion of dried meat from his pack, the wolf did not growl. She merely watched, her body tense, but her gaze no longer burning with rage. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the faint recognition that this man had released her from certain death. Whatever the reason, she allowed him to place the food just within her reach. She sniffed it cautiously before devouring it in seconds, hunger overriding her fear. The cubs soon followed, nibbling at the scraps he scattered across the snow. It was the first time he saw them eat, their fragile lives revived by the nourishment he had provided. The man did not dare to touch them, nor did he attempt to linger too close. But in that quiet moment, an unspoken agreement seemed to form between predator and human. He would not harm them, and she, in turn, would not attack him. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was trust, fragile as glass, beginning to take shape. The days of care and survival, the man could not bring himself to leave. The wilderness stretched for miles, unforgiving and merciless, and he knew the injured wolf could not hunt effectively for her cubs. So he set up a small camp nearby, far enough to give the animals space, but close enough to watch over them. Each day he ventured into the forest, fishing in icy streams and setting snares for small game, which he then offered to the wolf. At first she accepted the food with suspicion, dragging it away before feeding her young. But over time, her reactions shifted. She began to linger longer, her eyes following him not with aggression, but with quiet curiosity. The cubs grew bolder too, their playful nature overcoming their initial fear. They would peek from behind their mother, yipping softly, before darting back when the man looked their way. For weeks, this routine continued. The man tended to the wolf's wound from a safe distance, sprinkling herbs and making poultices he had learned from old survival guides. Slowly, the injury began to heal. The wolf regained her strength, and the cubs grew plumper, their fur thicker against the biting cold. During these days of care, the man began to notice something within himself shifting. He was no longer just an observer of the wild, nor simply a hiker passing through. He had become part of a fragile ecosystem, woven into the survival of this wolf family. In the quiet of the evenings, as he watched the mother curl around her young and listened to the soft crackle of his fire, he realized he felt something unexpected: belonging. For the first time, the wilderness no longer felt empty. It felt alive, and he was part of its story. The moment of departure, all good things in the wilderness must end, and the man knew he could not stay forever. The wolf's strength had returned, her gait steadier, and her cubs were thriving under her care. One morning, as the snow began to melt and signs of spring whispered through the air, he made the difficult decision to pack his camp. He had fulfilled his purpose, and it was time to step away, to let nature resume its course without his interference. Yet as he shouldered his pack, he felt a heaviness in his chest. He approached the clearing one last time, where the wolf and her cubs rested. The mother lifted her head, eyes meeting his with a calmness he had not seen before. There was no growl, no sign of hostility. Instead, there was recognition, an acknowledgment that he had been part of their survival. The cubs, curious and playful, yipped as he passed, their tails wagging slightly in the snow. The man crouched at a respectful distance. Then, with a deep breath, he turned and walked away, his boots crunching through the snow until the clearing disappeared from sight. He did not know if he would ever see them again, yet deep down, on both him and the wolves, little did he realize, this was not the end of their story, but would reveal itself 4 years later. An unexpected encounter in the woods. 4 years had passed since the unforgettable rescue of the wolf and her cubs. Life had moved forward for the man who saved them, but the memory of that day still lingered in his heart. One crisp autumn afternoon, He set out into the woods again, this time not to rescue, but simply to hike and enjoy the stillness of nature. The forest looked familiar, yet time had changed it. Taller trees, thicker undergrowth, and trails that had almost vanished. As he walked deeper into the wilderness, the silence was broken by the faint sound of movement. At first, he assumed it was just a deer or perhaps a squirrel scurrying through the leaves. But then he noticed eyes watching him from a distance. His heart raced. Standing quietly on a ridge was a large wolf. The resemblance was uncanny. It looked strikingly similar to the female wolf he had once freed. The man froze, torn between fear and awe. Could this be the same creature? And if so, did she still remember him? The moment marked the beginning of something even more extraordinary than their first encounter. Recognition beyond instinct. The man stood motionless, uncertain of what would happen next. Wolves are territorial, and running could trigger pursuit, but approaching could be just as dangerous. Instead, he slowly crouched down, avoiding direct eye contact but showing no aggression. To his astonishment, the wolf did not snarl or retreat. Instead, she tilted her head as if studying him. The man's mind rushed back to the night he freed her from the steel trap and carried her cubs to safety. Was it possible that this animal, after all these years, remembered that act of kindness? Wolves are intelligent creatures, capable of recognizing faces, scents, and even gestures. As he remained still, the wolf descended from the ridge and approached cautiously, her steps deliberate and steady. The man could see her powerful build and her scars, the same marks she bore years ago. His heart swelled with a strange mix of fear and joy. It was her. Against all odds, she had found him. In that moment, instinct seemed to give way to recognition, bridging the gap between human and wild in a way few ever experience. The pack reveals itself just when the man thought the encounter could not grow more surreal. Movement erupted in the shadows behind the wolf. Emerging from the underbrush came several younger wolves, lean and strong, their eyes glinting in the twilight. They formed a semicircle, their presence both intimidating and awe-inspiring. These were not strangers, they were her grown cubs, now mature and part of her pack. The man realized with a jolt that he was standing not just before the mother wolf he had saved, but also before the very cubs he had once cradled in his arms. 4 years ago, they were helpless and vulnerable, barely clinging to life. Now they were hunters, guardians of their territory, and protectors of the very forest he was wandering in. Despite their fearsome presence, there was no aggression in their movements. Instead, they seemed curious, as though their mother had silently signaled that this man was not a threat. The scene felt almost mythical, a reunion not between man and beast, but between lives once intertwined by fate. A test of trust. Although the pack did not show aggression, the man understood the fragile balance he was standing in. One wrong move could trigger instinct, and instinct could be lethal. He resisted the urge to reach for his phone or make any sudden movements. Instead, he lowered his head slightly and sat on a nearby fallen log, showing he was not a predator in their world. The mother wolf approached even closer, stopping just a few feet away. The pack remained watchful, their ears perked, every muscle ready to act if needed. Slowly, but had built an unspoken bond that time could not erase. A silent acknowledgment, reminding him that acts of kindness can ripple across years and species in ways no one could predict. The wolf returns at the right time. Years had passed since the man rescued the wolf and her cubs, and although he had moved on with his life, he often thought about that wild family. Then, unexpectedly, a moment arrived that changed everything. While he was deep in the forest on a routine trip, danger found him. The man was caught in a snowstorm far from home, his vehicle stuck and his body weakening from the biting cold. He realized quickly that if he did not find shelter, he might not survive the night. As his strength gave way, a familiar sound echoed through the trees, the distant howl of a wolf. His mind raced. Could it be the same wolf he had saved years ago, or just another predator drawn to a vulnerable human? Before long, dark shapes emerged from the tree line, and his fear surged. But then, recognition struck. The lead wolf approached slowly, tail lowered in a non-threatening way, and her eyes carried something that resembled familiarity. It was her, the same wolf he had freed, standing before him after years apart, as though fate itself had brought them back together in his hour of need. A surprising gesture from the wolf. What happened next defied logic and shattered every assumption the man had ever held about wild animals. Instead of attacking or retreating, the wolf did something extraordinary. She circled him once, then gave a short, almost urgent bark before turning back toward the forest. She stopped and looked over her shoulder, waiting for him to follow. Despite his exhaustion, he stumbled after her, sensing that she was leading him somewhere. Through the dense snow and icy winds, the wolf guided him carefully, as if she remembered the kindness he had once shown. Eventually, she led him to a rocky overhang sheltered from the storm where the rest of her pack awaited. Rather than acting aggressively, the wolves allowed him space while the lead wolf lay near him, her warm body radiating heat. He realized, with awe and disbelief, that the wolf was repaying a debt. Years ago, he had saved her and her cubs from certain death, and now she was saving his life when he needed it most. The man's emotional awakening, as he sat huddled under the rocky shelter, snow swirling outside. Tears welled in the man's eyes. He was overwhelmed by the gravity of the moment. In his weakest state, when he had nearly given up, this creature, once helpless and trapped, had recognized him and remembered his act of compassion. He felt a profound connection to the natural world that words could barely describe. He realized that true bonds transcend species, time, and even logic. Wolves were supposed to be feral, dangerous, and indifferent to humans, yet here was living proof that kindness had created a bridge between them. The wolf rested near him, her amber eyes calm, and the other wolves kept their distance but did not see him as prey. That night, as he drifted into sleep warmed by her presence, he understood something deeper about life. Every action we take ripples outward, often returning to us in ways we cannot imagine. He saved her once, and now she was his guardian. The pack's acceptance, perhaps the most shocking part of the experience, was the behavior of the wolf pack itself. Normally, wolves are fiercely protective of their territory and suspicious of outsiders, especially humans. Yet this pack, led by the wolf he had saved, allowed him to exist among them without hostility. They treated him almost as if he were part of their group, watching over him as he rested, ensuring he was safe through the night. He felt as though he had been invited into a sacred circle, something few humans would ever experience. In the morning, when the storm had passed, the wolves did not drive him away, but walked alongside him until he was close to a familiar trail that led back toward civilization. At that point, the lead wolf stopped, gave him one last look, and howled, a haunting yet beautiful farewell. The pack then disappeared into the wilderness, leaving him stunned, grateful, and forever changed. He knew this was no ordinary encounter, but something rare, mystical, and unforgettable. The lifelong lesson: the man eventually made it back to safety. But he was not the same person who had entered that storm. The experience with the wolf and her pack left an indelible mark on his soul. He shared the story with others, though many found it difficult to believe. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, while others were captivated by the raw beauty of the tale. For him, it was more than just a survival story. It was a lesson about the power of compassion, the depth of animal intelligence, and the mysterious ways in which life weaves connections. He often reflected that his simple decision to save a trapped wolf and her cubs had come full circle in a way he could never have predicted. It taught him that every act of kindness carries a weight, and sometimes the universe finds a way to repay that kindness when it is needed most. The wolf had given him more than survival. She had given him faith in the unseen bonds that connect all living things. A wolf in the night. One frosty night, while Daniel was tending his campfire, a low growl echoed through the forest. He instinctively grabbed his flashlight and scanned the trees. There, just at the edge of the clearing, stood a massive wolf. Its eyes glowed in the firelight, but instead of hostility, there was recognition. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew those eyes. It was the same wolf he had rescued years ago. For a long moment, man and beast stared at each other in silence. Then, to Daniel's astonishment, the wolf lowered her head as if acknowledging him. This was no ordinary encounter. It was a reunion. She was not alone, either. Behind her stood several grown wolves, likely the cubs Daniel had once helped save. They watched him closely but did not attack. Daniel realized then that the forest had not forgotten his kindness. What he had done years ago had come full circle. The wild had a way of remembering, and tonight it was showing him gratitude in the most astonishing way possible. A warning in the trees. The next day, Daniel noticed strange activity in the forest. The wolves lingered near his cabin more than usual, pacing and growling at something unseen. Their behavior unsettled him. He had always respected the pack's distance, but this time it seemed they wanted him to understand something. That night, the howls grew louder and more urgent, as if warning him of a looming danger. At first, he dismissed it as ordinary wolf behavior, but then he noticed broken branches, fresh tracks, and signs that humans had been near his property. Poachers. Daniel realized the wolves were not warning him for their own sake. They were protecting him. The loyalty he had once shown them was now being repaid. It was as though the wolves had taken him into their family, recognizing him not as a threat, but as one of their own. The bond that had begun with an act of mercy years ago had now become a mutual pact of protection, stronger than anything Daniel could have imagined. The night of the attack, one evening, Daniel was jolted awake by the frantic barking of his dog and the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. Armed with his rifle, he peeked through the window and saw 3 armed men creeping toward his cabin. His suspicions were confirmed. Poachers had found his land. Just as fear began to overtake him, the forest erupted with furious growls and snapping jaws. Out of the darkness charged the wolf pack, led by the very mother he had once saved. The poachers froze, their courage vanishing as the wolves surrounded them. Snarling and snapping, the wolves forced the intruders back into the woods. Daniel stood in shock, realizing that these wild creatures had chosen to defend him. It was not just instinct. It was personal. The mother wolf had not forgotten his act of kindness. Tonight, she was returning the favor in the only way she knew how. That night, Daniel witnessed a truth few humans ever experience, a wild animal fighting for him as fiercely as he had once fought for her. A silent understanding. After that harrowing night, the wolves remained close for several days. Daniel felt a strange calm in their presence, as though they were guarding him until the danger had fully passed. He often stepped outside and found the mother wolf watching him from a distance, her eyes steady and knowing. No words were spoken, none needed to be. Their connection went deeper than language. In those silent exchanges, Daniel understood that the wolves considered him part of their story, part of their survival. The forest was not just his home anymore, it was theirs together. Daniel often wondered if the cubs remembered him as the man who had carried them to safety years ago. Perhaps they did, or perhaps they simply trusted their mother's instincts. Either way, the bond was undeniable. They had shared fear, survival, and protection. And through it all, they had built something extraordinary. A friendship that blurred the line between man and nature. The full circle of kindness. Years later, Daniel reflected often on that fateful decision to help the trapped wolf and her cubs. What began as a single act of compassion had rippled outward in ways he never imagined. He had saved a life, and in return, that life had saved his. The forest no longer felt like a place he merely lived in. It was a living, breathing community that had accepted him. People who visited him often dismissed his story as impossible. "Wolves do not befriend humans," they said. But Daniel knew the truth. He had seen it in the mother wolf's eyes and in the way the pack had protected him. It was proof that kindness, when given selflessly, always finds a way back. The line between man and beast was not as rigid as the world believed. Daniel's story became a living reminder that nature remembers, loyalty transcends species, and sometimes the greatest friendships are the ones no one would ever expect. 4 years after saving the wolf and her cubs, the man could never have predicted how much his life would change. What started as a single act of compassion became a story of loyalty, survival, and the unbreakable connection between humans and the wild. The return of the wolf pack was not just a coincidence. It was a reminder that nature remembers kindness in ways that science cannot explain. The wolves came back not out of need, but out of choice, proving that even the wildest hearts are capable of gratitude. This story forces us to reconsider the way we look at animals.